Hey, Alex, how you doing, man?
Hey, Kyle, good to talk to you.
Yeah, I gotta say, man, there have been guys in the Patriot movement who really like Donald Trump way the hell too much, and I've told them in private conversations I think the guy is a fascist, and I try to kind of steer them over to your videos and such, and yeah, they seem to have made up their mind as far as him making America great again, allegedly.
Yeah, we've really seen a shift, haven't we? Alternative media. I can definitely say that, as someone that's been involved since 2005 in doing an Access TV show, at least in Portland, for a number of years there before I started traveling. I would say that a lot of the people that used to listen to me now that basically aren't listening to me now or following me online, they probably have drifted back into the mainstream Alex Jones camp and the Donald Trump stuff. I mean, a lot of them really do believe that, the establishment hates Trump, and this is how the establishment shows that they hate a candidate, by putting them all over TV and all over social media. So what I've been noticing in the last few months to year is this complete disregard for common sense on a number of different fronts. Hopefully we can start to really shine the light on those issues and get people thinking today.
Yeah, agreed. And I don't know, man. I mean, there was that footage of, I believe it was a rally in Reading, California, that was on June 3rd, so it was about almost a week ago from now. And it was the airplane landing of Trump's jet. And
right.
Yeah, I mean, that was just so freaky. The footage is not very long. It's like, 2-3 minutes. But they were playing on the ground, on the airstrip, on the loudspeakers, they were playing the music, the theme song from that Harrison Ford film Air Force One, which is this very triumphant sounding music. And as the Trump plane comes in, right when you get to the crescendo, people are clapping and adulating, and then they do a flyby, and then the jet comes around for another flyby, and then another crescendo when the plane is landing, and then another one when they kind of taxi the jet close to everybody, and then Trump gets off. I mean, this is cult of personality, hero worship, something fierce.
I think we're about to see things that we haven't seen in either the Obama presidency and the Bush presidency on a number of different fronts. We did see a little bit of the whole hero, angelic, messiah type symbolism with both Bush and Obama. But what you're talking about here with worshiping someone in a plane, doing a flyby and then coming around for another, we're starting to see things that we haven't seen before. And not just on the worship level, but with regards to it not being about the people versus the government, but one group of people against another group of people that are carrying the Trump signs. And we're going to get into this, but I'm seeing people go to these Trump rallies that don't seem to have the awareness. They certainly don't believe that Trump is setting them up. Certainly, I believe that a lot of people would find this idea laughable, but it happens to be what I believe is the case. And Trump has obviously said some very inflammatory things that I noticed were there to rally people up and get people upset early on. Actually even going back to the Trump rallies, where you had people coming in from Black Lives Matter and other protesters, and then it became kind of routine for them to be grabbed and sometimes punched, and for Trump to say, get him out of here, get him out of here, get him out of here, over and over and over. I've never seen anything like that, Kyle, from any other presidential candidate in the history of my lifetime. So, as we begin this conversation, I think that we're starting to see a number of things that we've never seen before with previous presidential candidates or presidents. And it's alarming because it almost seems like this is being set up for something larger.
Well, what's really kind of concerning to me is how everything's been kind of co-opted. So maybe you can explain a little bit about how the co-opting happened, or at least a part of it.
Well, we can look at certain figures in alternative media that are assisting in the co-opting that seem to be in some sort of coordination with Trump. Obviously, Alex Jones is at the top of the list. If Alex Jones was sticking to his guns like the old Alex Jones, and was calling out the corruption of the political process. For example, vote fraud, electoral fraud, all different types of fraud that, was involved in voting and the process. If he had stuck to his guns, because he did shows about vote fraud years ago and discussed the ideas of elections being thrown. Politicians aren't elected, they're selected. This has, for the most part, become common knowledge for a lot of individuals out there. So I don't exactly know how this co-opting specifically took place. I mean, this Trump thing kind of came out of the blue, and a lot of people took it as a joke. Right? It's a joke, right? This is like Rick Perry running, but a little bit more narcissistic.
Well, the hair. Right? It's the hair of the Donald, of course.
That's right. And the guy's being referred to as the Donald. I mean, everything about this is America admitting its worship of the narcissist. Unfortunately, there are also people out there that will say it's because Trump talks a certain way, a way that they haven't seen for a while, a way that they want things to be said. And like with Obama, I see Trump as being the person there that he's there to say the right things and the only person to say the right things. The issue with the trade deficit in China, there's a lot of issues between the U.S. and China that are significant issues with China and many things that Trump actually isn't even saying. He somehow figured out this marketing scheme like, hey, I have this PDF or book that you really need to buy. It's about the economic collapse of the U.S. economy. You really need to get it right now. You really need to, so we're living in this world of people that are seeking knowledge being targeted by people that want to get money from them and not actually give them a good product. Enter Donald Trump. And he's saying the buzzwords. It's obvious. We've been talking about China for years before this guy was even a presidential candidate, that we've entered this era where America is no longer number one. We can look a little closer and deeper into that and realize that's by design. It's by design that China has the monopoly on the rare earth minerals. Someone predetermined that. There were agreements made a long time ago when the United States went into the Middle East that China would have a certain amount of control over certain minerals. And so this has been an ongoing issue. China buying up more and more real estate in the United States. Is Trump saying anything about specific things that are going on right now with China buying luxury hotels in New York City? When you say, oh no, I don't hate the Chinese, I love the Chinese, I love the Chinese, you really may. I don't disagree with Trump. He very well may be working with the Chinese government on a higher level. I mean, it's very hard for me to believe if he is being selected for anything that he's not working with foreign governments or with people like Putin. So, there's a lot we can point out, but I'm seeing a lot of programming of the populace to kind of accept this totalitarian way of doing things, but also to kind of see Trump in a certain light and not see his potential, the potential destruction that it could bring this country. If you ask most people if Trump wants war with China or Russia, they say, oh no, dude, that guy is not going to be another Obama and Bush. That guy wants to make America great again. Well, how do those people explain the statements of Trump when the Russians buzz the U.S. destroyer in the Baltics, where there's greater tension than ever in that particular region of the earth? And there's more NATO-U.S. war games than ever in Eastern Europe. And there's still ongoing tensions over whether or not Poland's going to go through with all the demands of the United States. This goes all the way back to Bush. This encroachment on Russia via Poland and Romania and other countries. Anyway, Trump is going to play tough guy. Oh, I'm going to be tougher than Obama. I'm going to be different than Obama on Russia. Maybe those jets need to be shot down. That's basically what he said. So when I hear things like this, I see a person that's kind of getting us ready for some sort of next step to all this. Others are looking at, the inflammatory things that Trump has said about racial minorities and other groups, as well as the entire nation of Islam. And they believe the whole thing's a joke. And for a while, people have been taking the guy as a joke. Like, there's no way this guy's even going to get the GOP nominee. And guess what? We're right about at that point.
Well, it's funny.
So I'll hand this back down to you, Kyle. But did you think that he would end up the GOP nominee a year ago when all this started, or 9 months ago?
I thought it was quite possible because there was quite a buzz even back then, even when there were technically more experienced politicians, or actually politicians at all. Because if I remember correctly, I don't think Trump has ever held elected office. If somebody wants to correct me on that, please do. I don't think he's ever been so much as, the local elected dog catcher. So in terms of experience, there's automatically that problem right from the beginning. I mean, I remember when Stefan Molyneux at Liberty Fest West several years ago was making a joke. I think it was about when McCain was running for president. The whole notion of being a maverick. Oh, he's a maverick. And that in any other industry or profession or occupation, if anybody were to seriously tell you, I'm a maverick, it would sound absolutely ludicrous. Such as, I'm a brain surgeon, but I know a guy who's interested in brain surgery, but he's a maverick. He doesn't know anything about medicine, but give him a scalpel and a six-pack, and he's motivated. I mean, it's really...
That's funny, because Alex Jones got really behind the whole maverick, whether it be in reference to Ron or Rand Paul. But he was also really pushing the whole maverick terminology as well.
Well, yeah, and there are several different things you mentioned. Let's try and broach those one by one if possible. About the co-opting, something that I've noticed is there's been a lot of, I think, justified anger at the social justice equality freaks. These are the people who promote fake grievances of institutional racism or rape culture, these kinds of things. Or in short, everything's racist, everything's sexist, everything's homophobic, even when it's not. And I think what happened with Trump's presidency is that he's capitalized on that anger against the social justice warriors, the SJWs, and now he's somehow turned it in favor of the neoconservatives and the war on terror and all of that. So he's basically co-opted it and twisted that righteous anger with the establishment, pushing fake notions of equality, and turned it into some sort of, narratives about white genocide and a few other things that you've talked about before.
Right. Yeah. And he's definitely gotten people ready for some sort of conflict amongst the population, as we'll talk more and more about. Unfortunately, as I think that we're going to see more and more as November comes up, but even more so, not to jump too far forward, if he wins and if he's, I don't want to say destined, if he is the selected candidate, and they've made everything look like it was Hillary the whole time. I'm not so sure how the establishment likes Hillary if every time we look at the news, it's about her being indicted or investigated by the FBI for emails. I don't know if you've noticed that as well, Kyle, but yeah. I mean, every day there's another article about Trump soaring or another controversial statement from Trump that they want us feeding off of that emotional reaction, and then there's Clinton being investigated by the FBI for emails every freaking day.
Yes, of course.
Wow, the establishment really loves Hillary.
Yeah. I mean, it's just I don't think people can really analyze much, or at least some people can't analyze much of anything anymore. Probably because they're all wrapped up in I guess the most honest way of putting it would be the religiously superstitious nature of Trump's going to save us. And also think about that too, is that he's all style and no substance. I mean, look at Bernie Sanders, for example. The guy is atrocious, right? He's an openly avowed democratic socialist. But at least if someone were to walk up and ask me, dude, what do you think Sanders wants to do if he were given the Ring of Mordor, which of course is the presidency? If he gets the ring, how is he going to wield power? And I can very simply tell you, he wants to have $15 minimum wage, raise it to that amount. He wants to basically trash the economy more generally. I mean, I can go point by point, down the list. So I can tell you very much what Sanders wants to do. This is, of course, assuming that he's telling the truth in the first place, which, of course, politicians are known to lie. Assuming he's telling the truth, I can tell you that exactly. However, with Trump, I can't do that. the closest thing I can do, or really anybody can do, I think, is say, well, he made some vague references to, like, I mean, yeah, he doesn't like Muslims. I think that's kind of obvious. He doesn't like Mexicans either. And, you know, the wall, right? He wants the wall. That's kind of the big selling point. Other than that, it's kind of these vague generalities about how he's a businessman and so forth. I mean, the only real solid thing I can pin him on was, ironically, that horrendous interview. It's about 29 minutes long that he did with none other than, of course, Monsieur Jones, where Trump said something to the effect, and I'll paraphrase, "I am very militaristic, and I want to build up the military so that nobody will ever mess with us again," was what I believe he more or less said. So this guy is very much a big fan of the military-industrial complex, but then somehow the Patriot movement somehow thinks, in private conversations I've been told this, Alex, I've been told that Trump will actually keep us out of war because he is a businessman, because he will negotiate with the Russians or the Chinese, or, you know, pick somebody. So, I mean, it's really, you know, as you've said before, cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. I mean, it's just that. I mean, it's almost like, and who knows, man? I mean, maybe you really were right, what you've mentioned before about maybe something did happen in 2012, and you know, certain people in the alternative media have just gone over the edge in a sense. It's almost like they got sucked back into the left-right paradigm. Okay.
So to continue with our conversation, I really want to highlight this and make sure people do know this. Sanders said in the last few months, drones have done some good things, and goes on to state why he continues to support the use of drones against terrorists, and specifically in Afghanistan. And let's go back to this other revelation. August 30, 2015, Sanders says, "I will not end the drone program." And at that time, that was a fairly large headline. And this, apparently people really wanted to know what was Sanders' real position on this use of technology, let's just call it for what it is, using the robots of the Matrix against other human beings that have actually been degraded to the level of subhuman compared to terrorists. And we have stats now that 9 out of 10 of those that have been killed by drones have been civilians, innocent of all wrongdoing. I mean, this is just a fact, and it might be worse than that, and it probably is. So that's just something that I want to add to all that. But I am familiar with that interview that you cited between Alex Jones and Donald Trump. Now, I've seen the dark side of Alex Jones growing for years, and there's been many of us that have, you know, grown discontent with some of his behavior, but we've seen the good that the man has done. We've seen the good that he has done. And when he had Trump on, talking about making the military bigger and badder than ever, and when he was echoing Donald Trump's talking points, the number one problem, the way he was doing it was deliberate. I don't know what you were reading out of his body language, but I think that there is a large pool of telegraphing that any psychologist would have a field day with. The language, the pauses, even the way that it was looking at the camera. What I was getting from it was Alex Jones was letting us know he no longer was even close to standing with the people. He was in the establishment all the way. And even shortly after that interview, the way he was mocking, the way he was imagining the average Muslim speaking, saying things like, "I rape you, white woman.
Yeah, I remember that.
I hit you with head. I pull off burqa. Allah Akbar." He had never done anything. Even when he was really angry at Hispanics, illegals, coming across the border into Texas, when he was protesting La Raza, at that time he was pointing out things that sounded very rational, talking about La Raza's philosophy and whatnot, that in this case, he had gone above and beyond.
Yeah, and sorry, just to kind of paraphrase Stefan Molyneux one more time. See, that's what I don't like about that interview Jones did with Trump, is because it reminded me of something Molyneux mentioned in one of his videos. Old Molyneux, not the new Molyneux, who of course supports Trump, which is its own conniption all by itself. But old Molyneux mentioned in one of his videos that It's one thing to betray your principles. It's another thing to say, I have no principles. It's also another thing to say, I have exchanged my set of principles for the complete opposite set of principles because it is more convenient for me to do so. Like, those are all crazy, but at least they're functionally crazy. What's not functionally crazy, what is beyond all semblance of rationality, of empiricism, even basic survival, would be to say that these are my absolute principles, they've always been my absolute moral principles, even though they are actually in reality the exact opposite set of absolute moral principles that I had from the day before, and not even being aware of the switch. And so
Yes.
the question here is, would, and not just Jones, but more broadly, any of these guys who are supposed to be, fellow comrades, at least in spirit, in the alternative media, the content producers, are they even aware of the switch? I mean, many of these guys, or at least some of these guys were big Ron Paul fans. So so that's kind of an interesting question. How do you go from Ron Paul to Donald Trump? Last time I checked, Ron Paul, and there are his, set of faults, which we'll say for another time, but even Ron Paul was very anti-war. Right, and he did it on a constitutional basis. Trump's not that at all, not even slightly, especially with, I'm very militaristic. I mean, he just said it blatantly. So how do you go from one to the other? What kind of switch that you wouldn't even notice, as old Molyneux would say, would have to take place in order for that to happen? And I'm over here kind of going like, hey, wait a minute, I think there's been a switch, there's been as old Molyneux would say, there's been a deviation in policy. Can we at least point this out? No, shut up. Obey the establishment. So in a sense, I hate to say this, but even somebody who at least had a backbone like Stefan Molyneux, unfortunately, in many ways has been kind of absorbed, because he's been having interviews with Alex Jones too, and he's been saying how awful Muslims are as well. And old Molyneux, like 2008, 9, 10, never, ever said anything like that. I even went back into his archives recently just to be absolutely certain. All of this stuff really kind of started in large part with the so-called Syrian refugee crisis. So for some reason, that just kind of flipped some switch in the head. And now you've got guys who were openly avowed libertarians like Stefan Molyneux and Christopher Cantwell now getting on the Trump bandwagon openly. And think about it, those two guys aren't even in favor of limited government. They want no government. But they're supporting Donald Trump for president?
Well, that's a good point, because as the listeners know, I'm from Portland, and Portland has a lot of people like to associate themselves with the black bloc way of protesting. You were noting the video on my channel, Continuous Social Civil Unrest in Portland, Oregon, and you're saying, yeah, police look a little like they've done some aggressive tactics, but I don't really see the point of what they're doing, and protest in general, paraphrasing. Mm-hmm. And I would say that a lot of those individuals think that it's okay to call yourself an anarchist and block the streets and literally jump and stomp physically on someone's personal private property if you call them or believe them to be a fascist. And so it was in 2003, before I even started my TV show in 2005, somebody involved in the large crowd where they were shutting down the Burnside on the day they invaded or started attacking Iraq. I don't know what I did to provoke him other than looking at him and maybe looking clean cut, wearing a nice jacket. And the guy's going, fascist! He's calling me a fascist because Jesus. Me and my friend Gunnar are kind of like observing. Maybe we had facial expressions like, you guys are idiots. But we were obviously picked out of the crowd and identified to be fascists. And there were near fist fights between the guy that was trying to drive through and get home and this crowd. They were acting like they're out of their mind. Now, do these people really care about the victims of war in Afghanistan or Iraq? I've never known them to. But if there's an excuse to have a near riot in the streets, they'll be there. They will be there. If the media is trying to amp it up, and this is happening nationwide, it's a part of this Ooga Booga groupthink, they will be there. And so, yeah, well, we're definitely seeing with Trump the right co-op, absolutely, after they co-opted people on the left with Obama, which is kind of what concerns me, because it was obvious that Obama had appointed a, Monsanto CEO to head the agriculture department. One example of many. Things like that were like automatically coming out immediately after Obama was in office. And to this day, there's some that will still call Obama's critiques, ready, racist. And now we're dealing with other people that should know better. They're using the Bush stylized, you're either with us or you're with the terrorists.
Yeah.
You're with us or you with Obama.
False dichotomies.
Obama. And it has gotten racial. If you look at this and you look at the things that Trump has said, someone could be a Trump supporter and not be racist. They can be black. They can be Hispanic. They can be Middle Eastern. Don't know of any, but I'm sure they're out there. I'm sure there's a small but growing group of Stockholm Syndrome Middle Eastern folks that are all for Trump. That may believe what they're being told about even their home countries and not actually knowing without digressing too far into other topics, but it's related. It's part of what Alex Jones has been talking about for years, right? Mossad, CIA, Israel, other groups, funding radical extremists. So they have the pretext, problem, reaction, solution to invade the country.
Yeah.
This has been like the foundation since I got involved, and now all of a sudden that foundation is going to get pulled out from under our feet like the rug. And right now, you and I, Kyle, are trying to stand and not get pulled out with that. They're trying to pull that rug and take us somewhere else. And we're trying to stand and go, what are you doing? What are you doing?
Yeah, it's just kind of like, what are your principles? I think would be at least one way of approaching it. But just one more observation about the co-opting, and this is more of a symbolic thing, but it still concerns me because symbols arguably are objectively neutral, but whatever they represent is subjective. So, what could be what could be an evil symbol could also be interpreted as being a good thing. It's very much beauty in the eye of the beholder. But the problem, though, with those caps, I think you've seen these, the stupid little trucker red caps that the Trump supporters wear, where it says, "Make America Great Again." Actually, that's a co-opting in and of itself. And a lot of people may not know why, and I'll just explain very briefly. According to the ideology of classically liberal republicanism, as in limited government, you have 3 branches of government, all that kind of stuff you learn in civics class, the Liberty cap, which was originally borrowed from the Pyrogean cap, was a symbol of emancipation from slavery in the ye old Greco-Roman times and going forward. So people who had any sort of appreciation for liberty oftentimes would wear their liberty caps to say, hey, well, we're free now. And so that, even more so than the more obvious stuff, really kind of grinds my gears, because that's more of a distortion of history by trying to reappropriate what liberty caps actually are. And there's also kind of a slight, there's also a slight kind of hick or redneck aspect to it, where it's, instead of the actual cap as it is supposed to be, where it kind of flops over on the side, like the French did, which is their version of it, there was it's a trucker hat. So it's got to cut this, it's like that stereotype of like the corn-fed, backwards, not quite educated archetype. And it's just like, wow, really? So all these centuries of classical liberalism, of libertarianism, basically running headlong into Donald Trump? Really? That's where this has gone. Is now it just becomes full-blown fascism.
Anyone wearing that hat, they're going to be looked at by someone who's going to be what? They're going to be seen red. They're going to be seen red. There could be I want to know if those hats are made in China.
That would be an interesting detail to follow up on.
There's a lot of things I haven't looked at, Kyle, specifically regarding to Trump's background. You see, unlike Obama, Trump's been given the royal treatment. The carpet's been laid out. The flower girls, the flower men are there, and they're throwing the flowers. And there hasn't really been enough investigative work into the latest on Donald Trump. Years ago they would talk about Trump being connected with the mob and certain things relating to his businesses. And so, in the 80s, there were actually a few documentaries that were out. People could say, oh, but they were made because his political opponents made those. True. Just because someone's political opponent makes something, and we may not like that political opponent, it doesn't mean that information is 100% irrelevant. So I haven't seen anybody really dig deep enough into his background, and I'd want to know more about his offshore operations, his offshore connections, globalist connections, Chinese, Russians. Oh, you love the Chinese. You go there a lot. Well, tell me more.
Yeah, exactly.
More, because this is a part of the story I'd like to know more about, and I think that there's probably more there. Probably more is going to come out later.
Oh, I wouldn't be surprised.
The question is, how many people are going to admit that, though, if they start coming across the truth? Or are we going to see the same type of denial that we saw from those that supported Obama?
Yeah, and again, but even with the stuff,
and how long? Yeah, sorry to cut you off. How long will that go on? Is the question. 1 year, 2 years? How bad will things get? How bad does Obama have to make things for Obama supporter, actually an Obama supporter, to see that this wasn't really about a black man rising to power, or a black man, or the African Americans coming up in the world? It had nothing to do with that.
Yeah, I mean, but even with the material that's already been made public, I mean, he's openly admitted, even before the primaries, that he financially supported none other than Hillary Clinton. I mean, this guy is so blatant. I really do personally think he's a fascist. I mean, it is corporatism through and through. The merging of corporate and state power is something fierce. And this is supposed to be the beacon of liberty in terms of the government elections. Seriously. I mean,
right.
I'll say
Let's talk about Hillary a little bit.
Sure.
I just want to mention her Armani sweatshirt that everybody's talking about. Does that sound like the actions of someone that's genuinely in this to win this? That raised a few additional alarm bells. It brought the idea of the fight being thrown to Trump when you see politicians do things that are clearly not going to be well received. And that's something that's happening right now. All the buzzes, Clinton and the jacket.
Yeah, and all of this kind of, I hate to say this, but it's been like 4 or 5 years or so, and all of this ridiculousness about Trump and his craziness really makes me miss Ron Paul. I mean, what was Ron Paul's platform? It was basically bring the troops home, abolish the Federal Reserve, and kind of rein in the police state, preferably with the repeal of the USA Patriot Act specifically. But, if there's anything more broadly, like with, abolishing the NSA would be good, and a few other things. But that was pretty much Dr. Paul's platform for the most part. And again, much like Bernie Sanders, just like I did, boom, boom, boom. I can tell you exactly what the guy wants to do, except for maybe the wall and maybe tightening up the or or having a moratorium on Muslim immigrants. And it's like, well, what about all the other immigrants, like non-Muslim immigrants? But anyway, except for that, I mean, what else does Donald Trump want to do? I mean, he's very vague and ill-defined and very, very shady in the sense that he's like a slippery salesman. You can't pin him down on anything. I mean, he's very, very difficult, and I know he's been accused of flip-flopping, but in another sense, how can you say the guy is flip-flopping when he hasn't really, in one sense anyway, hasn't really taken a solid stance on much of anything except for, of course, very few things. I mean, it's just the guy...
I was going to say, let's go back and mention all the things, just throw some things out there, for example, that are not being mentioned by anybody. We can go back and forth. We can look at the property rights violations. Not like that's really representing a lot of people, but you have things happening in America where there clearly are illegal things taking place, real racially charged things taking place, people getting kicked off their land, real solutions to the job problem, going back and forth with you, Kyle. I mean, there's a lot of things that we can just name,
sure, well, in terms
that aren't even being given any.
Well, sure. I mean, in terms of grievances, real systematic grievances, just rattle off the top of my head, there's dragnet wiretapping, there's civil asset forfeiture, there's the nuisance abatement, which you had your own experiences with that I wrote about, and the others in that particular area in Colorado. There's the cashless society, there's central banking, which is what the Federal Reserve is, the main entity conducting that. I mean, it's just... I mean, there's more stuff, but I've written articles about them on my blog too. I mean, it's just, I mean, hell, even John Oliver of all people, who is just a progressive statist, even he did an episode on his show about civil asset forfeiture, and actually he did a good job covering it, by the way. But it's just kind of like, this is cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. It's just, the real issues are not getting mentioned at all. And in terms of like solutions or I don't like the word, but activism, well, that's not getting mentioned either. We're not allowed to talk about direct action. We're not allowed. It's got to be all reformism and work within the system and beg the state for favors and all of that. But but nobody wants to go or I shouldn't say that. It's not being widely promoted. Let me put it that way. It's not being widely promoted to use encryption, to go live off grid, to form local committees of safety, which is what the founders did. It's just anything that has an actual real chance at working. Hell, even Bitcoin's becoming less popular, which is its own subject perhaps for another time. But anything that any possible solutions or even options, Alex, that have a chance at working, none of that's being mentioned in the corporate horde media, and I think that's quite deliberate because they want us to be dependent on them for our very sustenance. And much like the Declaration of Independence says, he has sent out swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance.
And so it can also be seen that Donald Trump is dumbing down his language, and he is playing a role. Alex Jones took note of that. But it's like, but it's strategy, folks. I don't like the fact that he dumbs down his language, because you analyze some of these speeches. It's not like a real political speech. It's like a shock jock presentation.
It's a rant.
Studio audience.
It's a rant.
It's a rant with comedy, and we've never really seen someone do a routine like that before. So it literally is providing people with a sense of euphoria. Along with the religious zeal, that they've never seen anything like this. Now, look, we're not getting super conspiratorial with this, but we could. Is there something else going on with technology that's putting people into a more trance-like state? Are there any subliminals being used today that just may be out there that are aiding this process? Because the things that people are saying is absurd. The establishment hates Trump. Why is his face everywhere on the internet? 8 years ago, they'd have these polls. Do you like Obama? Or in 2012, same thing. Same kind of polls. Do you think Obama's done a good job? It's that same type of matrix that's bringing us the same stuff with Trump's picture. And do I think that I've seen more of Obama or Trump? Maybe it's because I also am online also on a regular basis and posting news to an associate's website. I see Trump everywhere. Every day it's trending. Look at Twitter, what's trending? It's Donald Trump. Look at Facebook, what's trending? It's Donald Trump.
Yeah.
What is the dominant position on Donald Trump in the mainstream, one could say, conspiracy research community, or formerly Ron Paul community? Some people are going the direction of Gary Johnson. I'm not going to marginalize all. But, a lot of people have had these switches. You brought up Ron Paul. Why have these people, some of them, a portion, been able to go from Ron Paul to actually Romney, if you also look at it?
Yeah.
There was some that were for Ron Paul that went to Romney in 2012 and didn't support Rand because they saw Romney as still an alternative to Barack Obama. Even though it was still a joke. And I looked at that guy as a joke, Romney. Not really in it to win it. There's another example. Go ahead.
Well, just to bring up the old Stefan Molyneux one more time, like his video from years ago, The Truth About Voting, that really shook me up in a good way. And he explained it beautifully. And this was about the McCain-Obama election. I think that was 2008, if I remember my history right. And it was just, how he more or less said it was, what are your choices here? A creepy hands-in-your-pocket socialist versus a cranky fascist? These are your choices and you're claiming that you're free? And it's like, well, I guess the bald-headed one, as he likes to refer to himself occasionally in self-deprecation, I guess the bald-headed one really got that right because every election, at least that I've, presidential election anyway, that I've paid attention to, is you are choosing between fascism and, well, really communism, but hell, let's just say state socialism. You're choosing between authoritarianism flavor A and authoritarianism flavor B, and freedom is never an allowable choice because the system is inherently, the entire nature of government is antithetical to freedom. I mean, even Ludwig von Mises, who was a classical liberal, Alex, even he said in his book, I think it was Liberty and Property, liberty is always freedom from the government. So, you know, the notion that Leviathan would ever give you a choice to reign in its own power is debatable at best. But even with the current political system, with the hegemonic two-party, or really two-headed one-party system, which is what it really is, yeah, you are choosing between fascism and socialism. And there's no choices. It's all central planning. There's no spontaneous order of the free market is allowed to work because the free, Mr. Market is evil. Remember, that's what Henry Paulson was kind of mentioning, that former, I think he was the Treasury Secretary at one point, right around the time when the bailouts happened, when he was threatening Congress with, give us unlimited funds or we'll tank the economy. It's just like, wow, really? And now you fast forward to now, and basically the fascist is basically the messianic figurehead, really, of what is the fading remnant, at least in one sense, the fading remnants of the liberty movement or patriot movement or truth movement or insert an adjective here movement. Or as some more cynical people would put it, Alex, the cultural bowel movement. It's just kind of sad that, again, much like how I mentioned earlier, there is a betrayal of principles. There is a disregard for the non-aggression principle specifically, at least amongst libertarians, and in fact, actually, just as a corollary, or I guess you could say like a control group to Donald Trump's craziness, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but there's also been this parallel development of the oxymoronic anarchist politicians, actually. And, you look at somebody like Darryl Perry, who was actually on Russia Today, interestingly enough, and the thing was like him and like two other LP candidates. And he was saying, yeah, I want to abolish the government like every other sentence. And while in one sense, that for me, that was cathartic, at the same time, I was also deeply disturbed because I was thinking, if you want to abolish the government, why do you want to become president of it? The head of the executive branch. That's contradictory. If he were to say that in front of like a private group, like at a bar somewhere, like what Larkin Rose does, that would be fine. I've got no problem with that. Free speech. That's all well and good. But saying I want to be your president, I want to be this type of government agent or employee, and I want to wield the Ring of Mordor over you in order to abolish the Ring of Mordor. And it's like, no, if you want to abolish the ring, then abolish it. Throw it into the lake, to use the symbolism from that movie. But, but of course, Darryl Perry, his candidacy's dead because you mentioned Gary Johnson a moment ago. Well, at the LP National...
it's almost as if you're talking about Adam Kokesh for a minute.
Well, Adam Kokesh, that's a little bit of a separate... Okay, yeah, he's an anarchist politician too, actually, because he wants to, have a... How did he phrase it?
2020 campaign.
Orderly dissolution of the federal government, I think, was how he called it, and then he used that confusing term, which I won't repeat here to describe, the supposedly orderly dissolution. But yeah, what happened at the LP National Convention recently, I think really shows the utter absurdity of the so-called anarchist politicians, and probably why Gary Johnson, whom you mentioned a moment ago, was pretty much handed the nomination. And I'm not sure if you saw this, and maybe people should go watch this if you can kind of stomach your lunch a bit, but there was another anarchist politician by the name of James Weeks, and I think he was somewhere out of the Midwest. And he actually might still be running to be a constitutional sheriff and all the craziness that is, topic for another time. But yeah, he was at the convention, and he basically took what valuable speaking time he had, and he literally did a striptease live on C-SPAN. And he was stripping down to the point where the cameras actually had to be pointed towards the audience, but you can still hear everything in the room. And I think, I'm not quite exactly certain, but I think they may have actually dragged him off stage. And I suspect part of the reason Mr. Weeks did that was because he was getting frustrated with the so-called national leadership of the anti-libertarian Libertarian Party basically choosing Gary Johnson again as their nominee. And of course, Gary Johnson is basically I guess you could call him a soft fascist, perhaps. I mean, it's just absolutely atrocious.
Yeah, one more thing I want to add as well. You mentioned Gary Johnson. A lot of people see him as a lesser of all the evils, libertarian, blah, 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 blah. You know, we'll never forget his comments on the whole Coney 2012 situation on Fox News. He was pitching himself to a Fox News audience. Maybe that was some political suicide. I don't know what was going on. But speaking in favor of intervention into Africa and using troops for this or that, and not what someone would expect, not what the average person would even really want to talk about. That would be a supporter of Gary Johnson. You know, they don't really want to touch that issue. So I just want to put that on the table. And a couple other libertarians, former Ron Paul supporters by name, to mention that people are still listening to. He may not have any books out right now, but and he's written some good things. But Jerome Corsi was there at the RNC. I actually saw him there because I was there, you know, observing the people coming and going, and had a pass to go to some of the events with some of the Ron Paulers. So the RNC in 2012, Jerome Corsi was there, and so was Peter Schiff. And I think there's a video of We Are Change confronting Peter Schiff with his support of Mitt Romney. So those are two perfect examples right there, very prominent individuals in, say, the liberty movement, or people that people listen to for their gold advice, for their silver advice, which many people argue isn't that good. You know, I haven't really looked at Peter Schiff with a microscope, and have kind of separated myself from the silver news, you know, thinking about silver a lot. I invested in silver once and then sold some, and now I have the money for land. That's another story. But I'm kind of opting out from looking at some of these people, in short, as any form of quality source information, because of their associations, because of their shady track record, and their intentions.
Yeah, I just, again, it's the betrayal of principles, and so I've kind of had to remind people, mostly in private conversations, but I think in the near future, I think I'm going to have to become really more obnoxious about it, is I am a libertarian. That means I uphold the non-aggression principle and self-ownership as absolute. And there is no, and it is an ideology, it is a political philosophy. And there is no group, there is no organization, and there sure as hell ain't no political party that can claim to really follow it in any real consistent way, at least that I've found. And, you know, I've written 2 different articles by these 2 different names, Alex, but it's the concept that's more important. There is such a thing as fake grievances, like what the neocons do with their, you know, fake Muslim invasion, and the social justice warriors as well. And there is such a thing as disingenuous activists. There are people, you know, it's one thing to be incompetent and just not understand, you know, much like how Larkin Rose has said, and there was a video of his called Offending Activists, which I highly recommend. But in that video, Larkin said something really, I think, really insightful, which is that the problem with most activists is that they don't understand what the problem is. And so it's one thing if somebody's incompetent, but it's a whole nother level of wrong if there was already like a preset agenda. There's ulterior motives. And I think in a lot of ways, not to get off the subject too much, but I think that's what's been happening, at least somewhat recently, where I've been dealing with the fake judges. Shane actually has been getting a lot of flack with dealing with the so-called National Liberty Alliance, which is not national, is very divisive, and therefore not an alliance, and of course has nothing to do with liberty. Very Orwellian is what I'm trying to get at. So, I mean, there's just this system, I think it's a systematic breakdown. And don't get me wrong, there are good people around, but generally speaking, I mean, I mentioned this in one article, I don't remember which article, but I'll repeat it here because I think it's an important idea for at least some people to consider. All the good that I've done, whether in the alternative media or outside of it, in order to free myself. Everything I've done to free myself, I've either done alone or I've done it in peer-to-peer relationships with specific individuals. And that's really been it. Anytime there's been a group situation, and look, man, I used to be a groupie. I'm an individualist. I'm sorry, I'll admit it. I was a groupie for a while, years back, because I was doing more the stereotypical, at least I tried to do the stereotypical prepper thing. And I went to meetings, and not just the prep, more, I don't like using that, survivalist, let me use the actual word. I did go to survivalist groups, different ones, to see, hey, can we form a retreat group? And, oh, well, how about that bug out location? What about that? Can we maybe, can get together? I did that. I also did the more mainline political groupie stuff. I went to the meetings. I went to city council. Hell, I even, spectated on different court cases so I would learn the corruption in the judicial branch of government. And local, not feds, not the federal, big bad federal government, local government. Okay, I've done all of that. And this groupie stuff with, oh, let's just get a bunch of people together and fix things is just, at this point, Alex, at least in some of what I blog about, at this point I'm just documenting it and trying to mainly make the point. I mean, just to use one brief example before we get back to the elections, is just between those two gun rights groups, the Second Amendment Foundation and the Jews for the Preservation of Firearms Ownership. And JPFO, it was a huge scandal when it happened, but not a lot of people know about it. They just got swallowed up by the SAF, and the SAF, the so-called Second Amendment Foundation, completely screwed over their own people, screwed over the JPFO people, because they like to make a lot of compromises when it comes to the gun control stuff, whether it's universal background checks, and they like to kind of court the Brady campaign and such. There's a lot of bad stuff that goes on, and the JPFO, they were staunch, these are our rights, what part of shall not be infringed do you not understand? And also JPFO went beyond, a little bit beyond, and then said the reason why we need to have firearms as not just as evocative of private property, so it's a property rights issue, but also because this is the only thing that prevents wide-scale democide from occurring, is a popularly armed citizenry. That was JPFO. I mean, they were really staunch, but then they've gotten completely, it wasn't even co-opted, they were more, as one insider put it, absorbed and diluted. So there's different examples, different things I can point to where I think there's a systematic attempt to really go after American political dissidents of any ideology and really try to not necessarily discredit, although there's that too, but really just kind of systematically dismantle any organized efforts to try and, whether the goal is restoring limited government or the goal is abolishing the state, either way, anybody who opposes the establishment as it is getting, is not only, it's not just getting targeted, they're actively being sabotaged is what I'm getting at. I think that's what happened with what I wrote about regarding Castilla County. I think that's what happened with a lot of these other examples, and even more I could talk about perhaps another time. Regarding the elections, I think something similar is pretty much at play. You're going to get people basically worshiping Donald Trump, and at some point, and let's say he is President Trump for a moment, I don't think it's exactly unreasonable to assume that President Trump would not betray his own supporters in much the same way that El Presidente Obama betrayed his supporters once he was in the White House and was wielding the Ring of Mordor.
Right. And this is an important conversation directly dealing with the Trump deception, because here we have sovereign citizens for Trump. I do think that we should tell the story as to what happened with Castilla County and how that led into you finding out about the fake judges in the connection with Burns, Oregon. But there surely is a lot of people in newer residents that might consider themselves patriots that found their way to Castilla County, as well as some people that have been there for a few years that are associated with the ideas of both the sovereign citizen movement as well as Donald Trump, which if you go by what Trump actually says, he's not promoting those concepts. They are trying to make it as what this is all about. Then there's the situation, oh yes, all the bumper stickers in Portland coexist next to Obama. Okay, so Obama's continuing the drone assaults on innocent people. You have a coexist sticker. I used to call them schizophrenics. And so here I am. I have a track record of saying this is value systems are not compatible. Here you people are. You're protesting the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and I was there with you, megaphoning the streets, and I remember the feeling of that unity. Now, we may not have gotten anything done. We may not have actually had a friendly potluck. I may not have actually dated any of those women at those protests. It may not have actually launched into something actually great and something you remember, like the summer of '69 or anything like that. It was a short-lived, oh, we're all mad at Bush, we're all screaming in the street, oh my God, we're so angry and we're so upset. And poof, and then Obama. And then it became this internal, oh, you don't like Obama? Well, you're a racist. Oh, then you're with the right wing. And everything became about the right wing and the angry right wing growing. Well, there's a lot of things we can say, but I think there is a lot of points we should make. They are trying to make people angry. And they have been riling up an aspect of America. If they choose to call it the far right, fine. Some people do get pushed into some far out there directions, but that's the effect of being hit with this propaganda. And so you have the left version and the right version. And we've had enough years now with this stuff going on since 9/11 to see the co-opt of both the left and the right. And it's kind of creepy how it's coming full circle. With this first, the Obama situation, and then people kept their mouths shut for years and no longer even caring about the victims of war. No more protests at all. It was all internal, right versus left. The Obama supporters versus those called the radical extremists that are automatically believed to be Glenn Beck listeners. And some people stood by Alex Jones in the earlier years when they were demonizing him when he wasn't as psychotic. And boy, oh boy, do some people feel silly now. Boy, I mean, it's like it's been a letdown because there's that to deal with too. People are seeing this is what happens when you put all your faith in a talk show host or in a movement that you actually think is unstoppable. With all types of cartoon Hollywood memes like V for Vendetta. It almost becomes like a religious thing. Like we're literally going to be running around with a bunch of masks. And we're really gonna run and storm the buildings and arrest the bankers. Yeah, but actually, I'm gonna pause here. Yeah, start launching the other stuff. But notice this theme here of occupy and storm the buildings and how mindless that is. That's been a recurring pattern that they've been hitting the left and the right with. Oh, just fucking occupy a building. Oh yeah, just make a stand this way. Oh, now here's the Bundy version of it.
Oh God, don't get me started on that.
See that play out. It's like, oh, well, I think we should because in the end. Most of those people there, nearly all, support Trump. Now, did Trump put out a statement in support of Burns? No. It's better for him to just keep his mouth shut. Yeah. So they'll still sit there supporting him, but what if he was to come out and denounce them? So, yeah, his silence was almost like, well, maybe I do, maybe I don't. And his appearance on Alex Jones, where was Trump on Alex Jones years ago when other revelations were coming out? He was nowhere to be seen. Yeah, there's a lot of dots where but
just to continue on, there was something I want to touch upon briefly with the example you used from V for Vendetta. You see, that itself, the whole Anonymous took it up, so-called, but it was the Guy Fawkes mask. That itself actually is a co-option of an earlier libertarian method. Actually, not a lot of people know this, Alex, so this is getting a little obscure, but I think it's time to bring it back. And because I think historically, I think there's a reason for that, and I think practically it can be very useful if it's used correctly, once people understand what it is. I was going to write an article about this at some point. I haven't done it yet, but basically it's Simon Jester. Simon Jester was a character in Robert Heinlein's The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, which, for those who haven't read the novel, is basically about what if the American Revolution took place on the moon. And the British Empire being those people back on Earth who are basically authoritarians. And so Simon Jester would do things like he would go around and scrawl messages basically ridiculing the empire and promoting liberty and so forth. And the idea was that it was a shared pseudonym. People would basically, whenever they scrawled something, a message or whatever, usually making fun of the government, they would sign it Simon Jester. So it would give the impression that Simon Jester was everywhere. But Simon was very specific. It was the libertarian values, it was freedom and liberty all the way, it was independence, like all of that stuff. By contrast, the whole anonymous thing is not that. Now they've tried to co-opt Simon, and I think to a large degree they have, but only because Anonymous is relying on people not being aware of Simon being the predecessor, because that novel, I think, was written back in the 60s, if I remember correctly. So that predates V for Vendetta, that predates all of that stuff. So I've said in private conversations, but I guess I'll say for the first time publicly here, I think it's more than high time to bring Simon back. Having said that, I do think there's also a role for people who are, much like yourself, openly avowed, you put your face on camera all the time and all that. And I think there is a role. I think there's a role for people to play as far as that goes. And I think that's healthy because it helps humanize the rest of us who don't get in front of a camera, or even those who don't get in front of a microphone or even a keyboard. Some people are not in the alternative media, shockingly enough. But I think there's a role that a lot of us can play, that we can all push forward together a vision for a truly free world at some point. Again, different strokes for different folks. But yes, I do agree with you that there's a problem with this whole anonymous thing, where basically a lot of times you will get your black hat hackers and even your government cryptanalysts and people like that. Well, they'll pretend to be anonymous, but then they'll DDoS their own websites. Basically, you could really say cyber false flags. I mean, that's just kind of obvious. I mean, at least to me it is. But to get back more to what you were getting at, that yes, you do have a lot of these overlapping, I guess you could say to greater or lesser degrees, anti-establishment political ideologies, like the oxymoronic sovereign citizens and similar folks who, if not explicitly, I will agree with you to the extent they are tacitly supporting, they are acquiescing, I think in large part, to, at bare minimum, the slogan of the Trump campaign, which of course is Make America Great Again, which of course, what does that mean? I don't want to get too historical here, but I've actually been reading some of that trilogy of those 3 reports that Alexander Hamilton, I think Hamilton's a founding father, I don't think anybody's going to contest that. But when Alexander Hamilton was the very first Secretary of the Treasury, he wrote 3 reports to the House of Representatives specifically, directly promoting what would now be called fascism, because he wanted a national bank, central bank. He wanted corporate subsidies for certain select industries, and he wanted to socialize the war debt. And the way to pay off the interest off of the war debt that was incurred from the American Revolutionary War was by levying the brand new whiskey tax, which of course directly led to the events of the Whiskey Rebellion, who ironically enough, most of those whiskey rebels were none other than American Revolutionary War veterans. So the federal government has a long history of completely trashing veterans. And, George Washington himself, first president of the United States, marched right up there and friggin' stomped those people down. Those veterans. So, Make America Great Again, if you're going to rewind the clock, what point do you rewind the clock to? Do you rewind it to 1865 and try to kind of negate the 14th Amendment and all the craziness that amendment has caused? Do you rewind it back to the Articles of Confederation, which is before the Constitution? Do you rewind it to 1775 to the battles of Lexington and Concord? This is the problem of the state, is that if you have a limited government, so-called, with specific limits on it, you actually have a lessening of economic and controls, price controls, and so forth. And there's all this production that happens with something resembling a free market. And then the authoritarians in the government basically look at it and go, that looks like a lot of wealth. And then over time they scoop and scoop and scoop and scoop and scoop. And then next thing you know, you have what a lot of conservatives would call big government. So if you rewind the clock back to, let's just say hypothetically, 1781, or excuse me, 1787, that's when the Constitution was ratified. Even if you rewind it back to 87, which was, of course, before the Bill of Rights, because that was actually wasn't ratified until about 3 years later, so no Second Amendment for you, and same for the Whiskey Rebels, by the way. It's just kind of like, I don't know, man. I mean, is the solution to kind of turn down the dimmer switch, or in fact to push the button and turn it off? And I think that's going to be the great debate of our time. I think Sam Adams also had something similar to say, which is that liberty is for people who, I'm going to paraphrase, but who have like an ethical or moral backbone. You know, liberty is not for a decrepit and immoral people. So when you have the anger, and not a righteous anger, but more of like a cowardly, whiny, bratty fit, like you were mentioning a little bit ago about the black bloc type idiots, where it's more just whiny. They're not actually they're not acting like adults and trying to explain real problems in the world. When you have more that kind of emotional attitude, you know, that lack of maturity, then, you know, I hate to say this, man, but maybe some people really just are not ready for liberty. Having said that, even if I was correct, does that therefore mean the rest of us that should be condemned to live under tyranny just because some portion of the population wants to be enslaved? I don't think that's fair either. And unfortunately, this whole government election thing with the presidency or the Congress, or pick somebody, hell, even the local elections too, the constitutional sheriff nonsense. I mean, a lot of that is basically, oh, please, Messiah, please come in and fix all my problems for me. I can't take any responsibility and affect my own environment and actually, you know, be nice to people, or even in some cases carry out justice, and maybe that's a subject for another time. But I can't take any sort of personal responsibility and affect my own environment. I mean, it's just like, wow, really? And this is the land of the free.
Well, yeah, I could show you a constitutional sheriff's candidate that at one time at least won $2,400 from people to stay on his property, promising them a desert Costilla County utopia free of bills and debt, as long as they become his bitch. And I'm speaking literally. So it's like, and you're referencing something really important to expand on. So you have people that want their liberty, but they're okay with the liberty of others being taken away.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, all these people are fearing the worst and fearing that these immigrants, most of these people are not even living anywhere near any immigrants. We've been inundated with new. I'm not so sure we're being overpopulated with Syrian immigrants, Kyle. I think that we've been really pumped up to a point. There's really only so many, and they've been, you know, distributed in certain areas. So we haven't seen any major terror attacks since 9/11, and that is contested as to what the truth is about that, and on and on and on. And so they're okay with not only someone else's liberty being taken away, a whole group of people being demonized and feared because of who they are, and then other racially charged stuff gets added in, as if that's what liberty is all about, in this direction that Jeff Rense has taken in a more direct way. All this headline, all this news, these stupid Windows 10 Orwellian updates, go away, please, just... And all of this, just from the Muslim invasion to the rape of Europe, and then this ridiculous claim, no, I will not take the microchip, maybe in 4 hours. Try me then. Try me then. And you have these claims of people joining ISIS. Now, these people don't want to be demonized, you right-wing radical, and they can call out the propaganda of the left-wing media, but they have a cognitive impairment to see things from someone else's perspective. Worse yet, situations where, because of hysteria, you have a multiracial country. You have people from everywhere in this melting pot. I mean, you'd think somebody would be a little bit suspicious that they would try to create this type of fear. Obviously, these terror events are not taking place. here wide scale. Like we've been taught to be afraid since 9/11 with all these terror warnings. And still, despite the fact that we're living relatively in safety from Middle Eastern terrorists, we have issues with our own government, with our friggin' neighbors, and with our ex-wives, and for some people, their ex-husbands, and we domestic shit as it is.
Yeah.
And it's like something's taken over their minds to where you don't be responsible for any of your own dirt. You all got to come together in some sort of a movement because you're about to be invaded by those that we say are invading you. And then the people just keep waiting and waiting. Meanwhile, you have a bunch of brown people walking around America. Sri Lankans, Mexicans, people from Honduras, Nicaragua. I mean, how many countries do I got a list that are just outside the box of terrorist and Mexican? I mean, it's pretty widespread. And there's been a number of groups immigrating here for a long time, and over the course of America's history, because of people's freedom to do what they want, not live in one of the pages of the chapters of 1984 where the state dictates who screws who loves who, and that's 1984. The 1984 Alex Jones forgot. It wasn't so much racially based, but was about the state intervening in love. I recall that. Do you not recall that, Kyle? The state intervening in human love?
Yeah, especially with trying to break up the family and all that. I mean, I know some people have had complaints regarding, male-female issues, for lack of a better term. The only extent to which I give any credence to a lot of that really only extends to the issues regarding the so-called family law. And actually, I did do a political field trip not too long ago where I saw that in action. And I wrote about it, and I think it's gut-wrenchingly horrendous. Which
I know what you mean, and that's more palpable and tangible. And what I'm kind of referencing is more of a hypothetical, theoretical. It's also happening on this other angle of creating such unrest within the country as to what women choose in their own lives. I think it's very real and very a part of this conversation.
Yeah.
We don't have to go too deep into MGTOW, but everybody already knows there's a growing movement of discontent people that are no longer interested in dealing with other people's social programming, and I'll call it that, social programming. So they want to escape that and live a happier life than dealing with a bunch of crap. And there's plenty of people that don't hate women that go MGTOW that just don't want to deal with all this social engineering. So when I see all this social engineering, I see all this even rape hysteria, in addition to other things, I see it as like a holistic dystopian system where it's not happening on one level. It's a multi-pronged level that's very real, whether someone believes that's coming from the New World Order or a conspiracy or even a higher level than that. I still think it's happening. And so I don't think it's our nature to be this freaked out, living in major cities, worried about who's a Middle Eastern terrorist, worried about bombs going off in supermarkets because of movies. This is such a unnatural, way to live. So in the end, I'm going to complete this point. This is what I feel Americans are living in, especially some white Americans that are vulnerable to influence and hypnosis, that don't think for themselves. They don't see themselves as more than just a white person or an Anderson and Peterson, but, talk about the spiritual stuff in other videos. I feel that's important. So people that don't know who they are, don't really like who they are, and they hate their job, and they think this is about your racial group or this part of Texas or Oregon or Washington. Wow, these are really tribal. Well, look at all the sports teams we've got. Look at all the college teams. Yeah. And they'll travel across the country to take on another college football team. That's just an expression of this tribal travel and battle stuff in our ancestry is what I'm basically picking up right now from that. Just that whole, thinking about our ancestral tribal nature kind of coming out in really a wacky way in today's day and age, where it doesn't really provide us any food or necessarily make us safer. It's a waste of time. So I'm going to pause there, but we're also going to get into shortly also what we think's really going on with some of these protests, where we see that same tribal stuff. The anarcho group over here versus the Trump supporters in Portland, Oregon, for example, as featured on InfoWars, as they pour the gasoline on the fire, and people enjoy the conflict, and they feed on the videos. And that's what I think is happening to a lot of people. They're feeding on this team energy type of a vibe.
Yeah, that's very much that kind of the worst elements of tribalism, for lack of a better term. There was something you mentioned a moment ago I want to touch upon briefly. You were mentioning that a lot of it's racially charged and it's kind of multifaceted. I know you've explained your experiences with people while you've been on the road. You know, Tales from the Road, I think you were kind of tongue-in-cheek calling it, where people would kind of give you odd looks or whatever, especially if you, for example, haven't shaved in a couple days or whatever. And that's not right for them to do for a lot of reasons. But let me just be straight up with you about something. I have lighter skin than you do. And I've been publicly outspoken against the social justice warriors. And even the other day, in a private conversation, the individual I was talking to made a presumption that I was a Trump supporter, and just the flow of the conversation just kind of got around to, like, what am I going to do to, more or less the context was, what am I going to do to support the Trump campaign? And I had to explain to him two things. First of all, I would never support a fascist or a communist. And second of all, I guess you could say I'm an ex-voter because I canceled my voter registration like 3 years ago, so I can't vote even if I wanted to. I actually executed a legal remedy, and it worked. I proved it. I put the paperwork up on my blog. So unlike the oxymoronic sovereign citizens, I actually have successes in extracting myself, at least to a limited degree, to be sure, from this this coercive entity called government. And you know, when I explained that to him, he was kind of flabbergasted. He was like, but you don't like the SJWs. And I'm like, yeah, you're damn right I don't. But just because I don't like SJWs, just because I don't like the SJWs does not therefore mean I'm going to hitch my wagon up to the neocons. Because I remember the Bush Jr. reign of terror. I remember the NSA scandals at that time with Pen and Trap, or what was it called? Drawing a blank right offhand, but it was like Trap and Trace and pen registers. I mean, a lot of people still don't remember a lot of that stuff. They can remember Snowden, but they don't remember going back that far. It's just kind of, I mean, my God, I mean, Stellar Wind, that was the big NSA scandal at that time. You know, it's just like, I mean, my God, I mean, I feel like I'm middle-aged, and I'm not. And then you have a bunch of these no-names from the Patriot movement go and do this whole fall on their sword routine up there in Oregon and act as if doing the little Gandhi routine is going to make a fucking difference. And it's worse because it's not even agorism, which is what Sam Conkin was talking about. Sam Conkin was all in favor of civil disobedience, but he said, like, look, guys, you're going to break the law. Like, keep it, you know, don't brag about it, right? You know, the idea is to not to go to prison. But that's not what the guys up in Oregon did. It's not what a lot of these nincompoops do, whether they're affiliated with the Patriot movement or not, where it's like, yes, I want to show people. I mean, hell, it even came out just the other day, Alex, just the other day, that Skylar Barbeau, who I used to think was a political prisoner, actually was deliberately committing civil disobedience with regarding to buying the rifle barrel that was too short, and he didn't pay the $200 tax on it, which is why he got raided. He deliberately did that, apparently, because he wanted to supposedly prove to people that, oh, you shouldn't be afraid of the government. But the way in which he did it was teasing the bear. Oh, yes, look at me, I'm the brave martyr. Look at me, watch me, and praise me as I fall on my sword in front of everybody and act as if that's going to change anything.
That's the same thing that Adam Kokesh did.
Yeah. At the Orwellian titled Freedom Plaza, where he cocked the shotgun.
After asking others to come with their firearms to Washington D.C. This was during that time where he was doing his Adam vs. the Man show in Virginia, right?
I think, if I remember correctly.
Right. This was post him working for Putin's network, Russia Today.
Yeah.
Which is now, we don't have time to cover this. As I predicted years ago, the pendulum is shifting. They got a lot of people in, co-opting with decent news and even the Alex Jones stuff to a point, and then it started shifting. They really poured on the conspiracy stuff hardcore. They were making it sound like Gitmo was in the United States and we're just being disappeared at random. And all this is for a reason. I think they're going to use this as an argument to intervene in America's affairs in our future. But I believe that this is all part of the narrative. They're building the narrative for world intervention. But that's my perspective, and that's a larger topic, and we'll get into that. As the pendulum shifts, though, things definitely seem more on the left end. It bounces between extreme left and right. They're trying to feed both sides. They literally have like Tom Hartman and Ed Schultz, and well-known Obama-supporting, at least at one point, leftists. And then they have also given ample coverage to the Bundy fiasco, round-the-clock coverage. A couple things on the Bundy thing. Let's just pretend someone never even heard about this and doesn't even know what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. Of course, there was the Bundy thing several years ago, and then there was the Burns, Oregon, takeover a wildlife refuge that did not include the initial people that they came out to help, the Hammond family. The roads were wide open. The FBI never cyber-attacked communications. For a lot of observers on the internet, there was this type of thing that was being televised by people like Pete Santilli, who had a reputation saying loot U.S. military cargo and things like this on trains, some of his videos. Shoot Hillary Clinton in the vagina, or that she should be shot in the vagina.
Yeah.
Caught with a gun, not registered. Let off, released, charges dropped, Cincinnati, Ohio. Weeks before. And then Burns, Oregon. We see people not even wanting to ask these questions and look into this while this is happening, wondering, are these real people? Or are they real people? And this is how stupid some people have gotten, to where we're on a friggin' flat earth. This whole thing's legitimate, and Trump's going to save us, and Putin. Oh, Putin.
I think the case is going to be more the latter, and let me explain briefly why I say that. There has been material coming out about both the original Bundy affair during the cattle unrustling back in April of 2014, I believe it was, as well as the Citizens for Constitutional Freedom, or C4CF, that was their actual name, by the way, and what the connection was between the two and the players involved and what all this is about. There's a citizen journalist by the name of Gary Hunt who's actually written many articles covering both situations, and he actually has two different article series, one called The Bundy Affair, the other one called The Burns Chronicles. And he's gone more... It's interesting, Alex. He's actually tried to bring transparency to what was used to be the more behind-the-scenes stuff, and now it's just publicly avowed. I mean, it's publicly avowed now that Ammon Bundy directly sabotaged Ryan Payne when he tried to explain to the locals there in Burns how committees of safety worked. It is provable now that Jerry DeLemus, during the earlier Bundy affair, was maybe not necessarily directly sabotaging it, but at the very least he was, let's just say, bringing discord. It is now a matter of public record that the Oath Keepers, probably most importantly, were directly sabotaging both the cattle unrustling and what happened in Burns, and there's even, Gary's kind of speculated on this to some degree in his articles, but maybe even had a role in the roadblock that occurred in late January that resulted in the arrest of the C4CF guys. So there's a lot more to the story, and I've mirrored, I don't think I've caught up to it all, but in like batches of 5 articles, I've mirrored on my blog both the Bundy Affair and the Burns Chronicles series, because, I mean, if we're going to try and figure out the truth of any of these events, and of course, what I think is a little bit more important, the implications of it, especially when it comes to issues of so-called activist organizing and what are the lessons to be learned from these case studies and so forth, I think that, if there's another side of this story, then I think that needs to be told, whether it's good or bad or indifferent and whatever. And there were direct sabotages against Ryan Payne. That is a matter of record now, both at the Bundy Ranch and there in Harney County. It's a matter of record thought that, actually, this is probably rather significant. The Harney County Committee of Safety actually requested the C4CF guys to leave the refuge. That's very, very important. A lot of people don't really kind of even know about that, or even if they do, they can't quite figure out the significance of that, because according to, what the founders did, a committee of safety is a parallel government. It is quite literally starting over, and it's not a sovereign citizen thing at all, even though there's also the separate story about the sovereign citizens trying to co-opt that, which is what the National Liberty Alliance was doing, and that's why Shane wrote his article trying to expose that. And I think he did a good job because he got a lot of flack over it. But, what the Committee of Safety says goes. And the fact that they were ignored like that really shows the lack of integrity, at least by Ammon, if not the other C4CF guys, they claim to be constitutionalists, but then they completely act contrary to what the founders actually did. So, regardless of your ideology, if you look at, for lack of a better term, if you look at some activist and they have their rhetoric, and then they have their actions. If their actions directly contradict their rhetoric, then you know that they're either basically not all there, or perhaps, and this is what I argued in a different article of mine, perhaps they're just disingenuous. Perhaps it was just there are ulterior motives, and there's other agendas at play that should be exposed. But yeah, the fact of the matter is that the BLM at the Bundy Ranch, they did retreat. There were militiamen with firearms that were pointed at the BLM SWAT thugs. That did happen. Actually, a lot of people don't know about this, Alex. I'll just mention this briefly. The SPLC, remember those lovely people at the Southern Poverty Law Center? They even wrote articles at the time, that same month, saying that because of the retreat of the BLM during the cattle unrustling, that was actually a great victory, a great day of victory for the Patriot movement. They said it explicitly. I can probably, give you the article later, maybe link it in the show notes or something. But they openly admitted it. And then, actually, hold on. One thing about what happened in Oregon is rather significant, and this shows the connection between the two. Do you remember after the roadblock in late January, there was those folks who were left behind who became known as the Final Four? And they surrendered in February, roughly about 2 weeks later or so. Now, what's rather interesting is that Cliven Bundy, Ammon and Ryan's dad, he basically left Nevada to actually help reinforce those guys, those Final Four. Actually, that's what was actually happening. And of course, because nobody practices security culture, nobody gives a damn about their right to privacy. These idiots, whoever was operating the Bundy Ranch Facebook page, while Cliven was en route, actually said, and Shane grabbed the screenshot of this, and I love him for doing it, but it said that Cliven is on his way to reinforce, or something to that effect, but basically go help the guys out, the Final Four, more or less was the context of it. So when Cliven shows up, and I believe, if I remember correctly, I think he did show up at the airport, I think in none other than Portland of all places. Then he got picked up, they slapped the cuffs on him, and they threw him in the paddy wagon, and he's been incarcerated ever since.
Right. So
if you consider that all the game, just go with me on the hypothetical here. If there was such a thing as a great victory as the SPLC complimented the Patriot movement on, any sort of gains that were made in the cause for liberty by constitutionalists and so forth at that time, any sort of gains that would have been made really have now been rendered moot because Cliven is incarcerated. Because not only that, but Cliven and the other guys who were involved with both situations, have the laundry list. And actually, Shane has got on his Liberty Under Attack website, he's got the political prisoners archive of different people, but he also has a dedicated page specifically for the C4CF guys, and the whole litany of paperwork, or what a different colleague of mine refers to as the paper chase. All the legal documents that have been released so far regarding their prosecution. It's just they're adding on so many charges. In fact, actually, let me put it this way, just to conceptualize this very simply, Alex. Pete Santilli, legally, is in much more trouble than John Ritzheimer. John Ritzheimer is only being charged regarding what happened at the refuge. Pete Santilli is being charged with what happened in both places. That's what his court documents show. And so that's rather interesting that the federal government basically delayed for about, something on the order of about 2 years now, April 2014 to about January/February of 2016, to prosecute the guys for what happened during the cattle unrustling in Nevada. So that's interesting. I'm not sure the full implications of that, but wow, geez, I thought if crime was supposed to happen, these supposed crimes or victimless crimes, or sometimes even real crimes with actual victims. Shocker, right? I thought the government's supposed to, send the police to go catch these guys and prosecute.
I gotta say this, I gotta get this thought out. It's more in the interest of whatever's controlling our government to go after people that would be freedom-oriented. So it's not organized crime that they're into, that they're going after. And they are on a level, but this is a whole other operation. So I see those two operations, I call them operations, the Bundy Ranch and Burns, as being tied together as part of this larger one operation, where one begins, and then it goes on for a couple of years to amass that popular support because of the perceived victory from the Bundy Ranch. Yeah. And there was Ryan, like some out of a Hollywood movie, and then the West was won. Yeah. So now, I'm one of those that believes in things like intuition and gut instinct over even what people call rational thought. And ultimately, it's what guides me, and what I believe to be real rational thought. What do I really feel from this individual? Some people, I think, have an uncanny talent to know if someone's lying to them, like looking into their eyes. Something like that. I think that it's kind of an ancient skill of mankind. And so there's a lot of ways in which we've lost that. We've lost that part of our knowingness to tell if someone's straight up lying to us, if that smile from Obama is actually legitimate, if that grin from Trump is actually from a place of friendliness, not like I can't wait to see all of you dead type of a smile. Yeah. And I think that really we've seen people lose that. Pete Santilli has been involved in so many statements encouraging people to commit crimes against the government, as Vinny Eastwood has done a very good job documenting. Because of their personal problems, Vinny is only focused on Pete Santilli and not this larger story. But in his investigations, there's actually quite a paper trail to Pete Santilli in the amount of disturbances he's created and the amount of things that he's got off doing that none of us, I don't think that you and I could really get away. No. Honestly. No. With the things and so I think it's for a reason. So, I started with a point, organized crime. What do we see in the 1980s in those old movies and books and things like that when they got people to rat on someone or testify in court? They ended up going into something called the Witness Protection Program, and it became such a big program that Hollywood movies featured people going in the Witness Protection Program. And I suspect that something like this is waiting for Pete Santilli. After this processing, who knows? But it's not outside the realm of possibility. And a lot of this ended with the death of Lavoy Finicum. And there are more than a few people that have gone, well, wait a minute, why are they only showing us this? It was already kind of telegraphed the government kind of wants some conflict or people to be responding to the Hammonds. And when I said they left the road open, what I meant by that is it's like, you have an operation with the FBI is there and men are armed. But the road is open and you have people like David Fry or others that are talking about their suicide mission, multiple references to be willing to die for their beliefs as if they are an American jihad. Making it easy for Raw Story. Making it easy for the smear campaigns because of the statements that the men actually made, that John Ritzmeier actually made. Yeah. Daddy made an oath. And it's like, I was hoping that people would, really start to see the patterns, like, wait a minute. Are they all having a mental health crisis? Are they all affected by the solar flares? To think like I do in reference to some things, sure. Solar flares and personnel. Or is this part of a script? Where people are constantly hearing this stuff, so other people suffering from PTSD, other people on the edge, other people that think, well, we got to take a stand and we have to do it together. This is the only way you do it. And this is how hundreds of people were commenting on Facebook and on YouTube. Now, how many of those people were real people? A sizable amount. How many of them, though, could have been part of a troll unit? To put out that information, we know that it's been done before, so it's possible. So with Lavoy Finicum and his death, for a while he was a martyr, and the roads were still left open, Yeah. Because there could have been the potential for 500 wingnuts, and I say that term loosely, to show up there by the droves to drive through the barricades. Now, what were those videos saying? what was that guy who looked like a Porky the Pig, like a really heavy-set guy? He was overweight. He was obese. And he was screaming for people to shoot the FBI. Now,
yeah. That was, hold on, I can answer that. That was actually...
All this is evidence as to what happened in those last days that everybody has to take into account. They were calling for violence and for people to come up. The FBI never shut down their stream. Those roads weren't shut down. That was the next part of the operation, the post-Finicum shooting response. Now, I've committed blasphemy, apparently. No one's actually said this, but I'm just being comical, yet maybe I'm serious. I don't believe he's dead. I believe that whole video was designed to create a massive backlash response that they still haven't got. They still haven't got their Timothy McVeigh 2016.
Well, it is true they had a closed casket.
It is. They had a closed casket. They had... The camera from a drone or a chopper, a helicopter, but what about dash cam? Dash cam, and the reason I ask that is because we live in a world where we've been inundated with videos of dash cam shootings.
Right. Very
violent shootings on the TV news. And those shootings have led to widespread riots already in American cities. Black Lives Matter. And it's spawned this, people literally being murdered in the street. It's caused a hysteria. With this one, it's like, well, maybe we'll show up, but maybe we'll act like we're covering it up. Just continue this whole mind fuck and see what kind of response we get. Anyway, as far as the response they did get, like a lot of things, people just forget and they go into other things. You know, I don't see where all these big tough talkers are right now. Kind of like after the whole operation, all those people that were screaming, "Why don't the real man fucking?" I know women can get a little hysterical naturally in this society. And it seems like there were people acting really hysterical and not being, like, accountable for being hysterical and emotional, and maybe a little bipolar, maybe a little mental health issues thrown in, maybe too much coffee, not enough healthy food, too much McDonald's. I don't know. Too much Facebook. But I was seeing a lot of signs of mental illness in the online social media spectrum, and a lot of silence afterwards. Like, oh, okay, now just go back to your lives. Forget about the fact that you were fucking screaming at people to go and one last point. This guy up in Portland that tried to get involved in my life somewhat and was kind of a psycho, goes by the name of 8-Digit PDX on YouTube. He was telling me to go up there and get some of his buddies at the Bundy Ranch to drive my vehicle up. And now that we know, I always knew the guy was a little screwy. Like, and why would you suggest that I drive when I'm living in my truck? Out of a safety net to the Bundy situation. Yeah. And now we know that there's been arrests of people that went down there during that period. I could have been on that list if I was to be one of those, oh, yeah, I'm going to fucking go down there and cover up Peach and Sully. Yeah, fucking give me back my cows. I want a hamburger. I'm sorry, man. Were those people there for the off-gridders in Costilla County? We know that that wasn't the case. And Daryl Carter and everybody else. I mean, was the problem that we weren't making burgers, that we didn't have any cows? Apparently it was. No cows, no service. No Patriot response team. Then again, we did get, and then we'll kind of morph this conversation, I think, into the recent protests of violence, but we kind of did get a Roger Marsh talking about a rapid response team. Yeah. And here I am watching Bundy in January of this year say the same words, rapid response team. So the closing thought on this rant is that, you know, it's as if the government was maybe testing both areas. You know, with Costilla County, they thought, no, this isn't really going to work. There's only so many people here, and they're really not that radical. They really just want to be left alone. And then Bruce Doucette, which you're the first person to actually write about who he actually is, or let's just, at least we know who he's not. To everybody else, it wasn't a juicy enough story, but it's pretty significant when you have people like showing up out of thin air saying, I'm a judge, I'm a Superior Court judge. And then you got all these people get in line to declare themselves sovereign citizens. And it's and you're noticing that this is still going on despite your research, correct?
Dude, Alex, I've been getting a lot of crap. I mean, Shane's been getting a lot of crap regarding the whole NLA mess, and I've been getting a lot of crap specifically for really illuminating the fact that there are fake judges at all. I've actually been ostracized from a few circles, by the way, because of that, which I'm fine with. They were kind of going off kilter in the first place, but it's rather interesting how fast certain types of folks will just turn on you. And hell, I mean, you've had your own experience with that you've explained before in your various videos. So I get where you're coming from, at least to a certain extent. It's just, how do I say this? The latest development with the fake judges is that basically they're claiming that by the end of this month, so basically roughly around the beginning of July, everything's going to suddenly change, everything's going to be really bad and horrible and all that, because supposedly, and this is just my supposition because they don't ever explain anything clearly, so I have to piece everything together and kind of guess.
Was this more economic collapse prediction?
No, actually. They're claiming that the Vatican is going... Okay, this is me paraphrasing it, so just disclaimer on that. It seems to me that they're claiming that the Vatican is going to basically own everything in the United States, and therefore, we're going to experience some hypothetical version of martial law, or, insert Donald Trump type vagueness here. So the fake judges are basic, and some of their sycophants, which, oh, by the way, they call themselves We the People in Colorado. So there's actually an identifiable name now for their, I guess you could call it a group, maybe loose coalition perhaps. But yeah, at least one of them was saying, sorry, this is actually something very important, and I did link to this in some of my latest, not articles, but blog posts where I was just trying to keep on top of this. There's a blog called Four Corners Doctrine, and on that blog, which is very haphazardly put together, and that's coming from me, and I'm a blogger. I do this. This is my main activity in the alternative media, not even making podcasts necessarily. But it's very haphazardly put together, but I was able to find the one page tucked away in a corner somewhere where they actually have a list of all of these conference calls they have that are done by this so-called We the People in Colorado, and these conference calls last 5-6 hours, and it's hosted on a third-party site. And, I was listening to portions of it, and, it's just... some of it deals with how to deal with traffic infractions, which I disagree with much of what they say because I don't think they understand the law, but topic for another time. But it's constantly this just, you know what it is, Alex? It's doom porn. That is exactly what the fuck it is. And again, wrote another article.
And we can see on Facebook a lot of the stuff they're posting is InfoWars stuff in favor of Trump. I was going to mention before, a lot of off-gridders putting their support behind Trump. Doesn't even make sense. He doesn't support people exiting the system.
No.
But there'd be children being cannon fodder for the military and getting tough again and getting fascist again and crazy and all that. Nothing to do with living in freedom. So yeah, and so they're distracted with all this doom porn and conspiracy trash as opposed to maybe some good stuff, falling for the cult of personality, both political and alternative media. And I've learned some personal life lessons. I went out to kind of live a more rural life off-grid and meet people who are more enlightened or awakened, either spiritual or political or easy people to work with, to learn how to build stuff and not want to use someone, but have more of a, let's do this over a handshake. I help you, you help me. And, instead, in my off-grid adventures, I'm learning that people are people everywhere. And so, yeah, a lot of the internet stuff and information is taking people away from really living their lives. Even if they're off grid, they can be inside all day consuming the wrong content. That's another conversation for another time, just the technological aspect of all this.
Yeah.
And social media.
Well, actually, something I did want to touch upon briefly, and I think you said this in one of your recent videos, is that there was a fellow who was peddling fake news, some older guy or whatever. Okay, hold on, no, there's actually a connection here.
Right.
I'll mention it briefly. The vlogger's name is Gary Larrabee, and I was kind of perusing. I was actually looking at something else, and I came across this stuff, and I was looking.
You know who I'm talking about? It's
well, no, this is publicly avowed. This is not a national security secret or something. But yeah, Gary Larrabee. Actually, I got mentioned, and basically, here's the short version. He was reading some articles by none other than Anna von Reitz. And she wrote, I'm actually mentioned in more. I actually went and double-checked what he was reading and found out that he really was This really was written by her right off her own website. And I'm mentioned in at least a couple articles, but two primarily. Let's see, hold on. One was called "To Kyle Rearden, Try to Get the Labels Right." And then there was a follow-up one, which is, and Alex, you will love the title of this because it says it all. "There are no fake judges and no sovereign citizens either." So she directly attempted to rebut what I wrote about, not so much about what happened in Castilla, but more the follow-up to that, which was the fake judge article, which exploded. Oh, it exploded. That article on different alternative media websites, which a lot of good people were able to mirror, cumulatively, last time I checked, was in excess of 2,000 views. If you take all the view counts that different people were telling me and put them all together. So that, I'm now the fake judge guy, or at least the guy who blew the whistle. Well, maybe not blew the whistle. Technically, you were the first guy down the trail. Actually, fake judge was actually your term, and I borrowed it from you. And when I was interviewed by Maggie Rose, I told her that to her and her audience as well. It's just kind of like, and you're right, they are fake judges.
That's rude. And I'm thinking, like, wait a minute. No, these people are fake.
Yeah.
That's not rude at all.
Yeah, no.
Well, you say fake, but I was thinking she doesn't get it yet.
No, she doesn't.
I'm glad she was interviewing you. That's awesome. But she was being a balanced, I'm going to interview you, but I'm also tied in with the other side. Was that kind of correct?
I think she knows enough to know that there's something wrong with them, but if you listen to the call-in she did to one of the We the People in Colorado conference calls, and I did put up an excerpt of that up on my blog. So the fake judges have tried to basically rebut what I wrote about them by saying there are no fake judges and no sovereign citizens either, as Anna Von writes at her second article about me, where she was basically saying that I'm falsely in league with John Deresh and the NLA, which is the same organization that's trying to subvert the Committee of Safety concept that Shane wrote about. So it's this very Orwellian, topsy-turvy craziness and that's why Shane and I did those two, LUA special editions on the sovereign citizens being douchebags, quite frankly. And that's just what it is. So I do think there is such a thing as a disingenuous activist. I do think that needs to be considered when people are making decisions about whom they will associate with, and especially in terms of how do you go about vetting people, and to some degree, even more importantly, when should you ostracize someone because of their bad behavior? And I'm not talking for piddly little shit, Alex. I mean really atrocious, nasty stuff, like framing people, because that's actually happened in years past. When one particular woman there was an attempted frame-up when she was given a shotgun that was less than where the barrel length was less the legal limit, and that was only 5 years ago or so. So this is just constant. And, so when people have asked me, do I join groups or do I get behind a political candidate like Donald Trump or anything like that? No. Hell, I didn't even vote for Ron Paul, and I thought he was tolerable. According to me, I think he didn't go far enough, but hey, I don't want to let the perfect be the enemy of the good either. It's just that, look at how far the so-called liberty movement, for lack of a better term, has fallen, at least in a collective sense. And now it just seems to be like there's this scattering of smaller batches of individuals, and then, individuals on their own, who are just trying to, whether in the alternative media or not, just trying to kind of, I feel, Alex, like you and I are trying to pick up the pieces, quite frankly. And so with this, I think you could call it the fake hope of Donald Trump, I think is really kind of what's happening here.
Right, and to segue to kind of the videos that are now emerging on the internet, things started with the incidents within the Trump rally. And what I interpret to be kind of a challenging, well, Black Lives Matter won't get my microphone. Just the way the whole thing was done is like, okay. And then kind of the questioning following, well, I wonder how much of this is staged.
Yeah.
And then I also want to say, when I say staged, it means that from a number of different perspectives. Someone could play their role in reactionaryism They can react without thinking. They can be a pawn. They can be an unknowing pawn. And they can be part of something that is staged, or a movement that is staged, or a reaction that is staged. They don't have to know themselves to be part of a deception. They can be a pawn, and they can still be staged. So I kind of see the staging, kind of stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, as this, one could call it a psyops, an operation, whatever. A deception just keeps continuing to the next level of aggression. And it being mostly one thing. So, of course, the media does a great role. We've seen it promoting certain protests and movements, and people, monkey see, monkey do, not only with Occupy, but with other things. So I noticed as there was more and more of these incidents, with people throwing a temper tantrum at a Trump rally and maybe saying some things that were legitimate, just getting desensitized, get them out of here, and then people getting, it turning like mob-like. Short point I want to make. I was watching a history documentary about the rise of Nazi Germany, and it was just hitting too close to home, and I turned it off. It's like, oh my God, this is just bizarre. This is just way too close. Also concerning is the fall of Nazi Germany, and the horrible things the Russians did to, say, the German women that people don't really talk about, but it's part of history. So, I kind of feel bad for people that do evil sometimes. I'm not necessarily saying Trump supporters, just people in general that get whipped up into thinking that they can hurt someone else or beat someone else, beat someone into the ground.
Yeah, it's just kind of like, how much of this is genuine with the bloody noses, or like that one footage of the one guy who looked like a doppelganger of Donald Trump, and then he had to climb over a bunch of bushes or whatever to get away from the presumably Bernie Sanders supporters, or at least anti-Trump people. How much of that is staged and, shall I say, false flagged, at least in some sense, or how much of it is really genuine, and we're just seeing the playing out of these archetypes? I think, Alex, I think this is a question I think everybody should really consider is, has the left-right paradigm reasserted itself with a vengeance?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. Well, I agree. It's once you see people who were, again, as was mentioned earlier, Ron Paul supporters suddenly, there was even was it a Facebook group or something else, I'm trying to remember, but called Libertarians for Trump. That's when I knew that the writing was on the wall. And by a similar token, actually Shane wrote about this a little bit. There was this one, I guess you could call him a journalist, that worked for Reason magazine. And he was making the case that Bernie Sanders was the libertarian choice because foreign policy supposedly was wonderful, even though it's not. So that's what it is. It's very much the two-winged one bird of prey that is trying to trick people into believing that it has anything to do with freedom and liberty. And sometimes they invoke the Constitution, sometimes they don't. But I think that's what's really happening here, is that people who were starting to care, in terms of shades of gray, about genuine freedom are now finding themselves very much supporting quite authoritarian, at least rhetoric, if not outright public policy proposals, whether it's building walls or anything else. Which, of course, that specific one has nothing to do with actually dealing... Look, I live in Texas. The border actually is an issue here. And, look, if the problem is a bunch of trespassers hop-skipping and jumping over the Rio Grande, building a wall does not solve it. There are other things that can be done, and I would suggest that the so-called border is a failed government program. And like all failed government programs, there is no such thing as reforming it. I have suggested before, and I wrote an article about this too a couple years ago, that there are certain business opportunities to try and provide private service, genuine, not Blackwater, but genuine private security services to Texas ranchers, because most of the southern border actually is in Texas, or along the Texas portion of it. So there are things that can be done in terms of the actually, that's the other interesting, Alex, it's not even the government-owned lands that abut the Rio Grande. A lot of it is actually private property, too. Private property. But, of course, the patriots that were involved with with the Bundy affair or the statist turf war in Oregon notice their rhetoric was constantly, oh, it's public lands. We only care about the public lands. Oh, but anyone who's like, they're like private property, their own, whether even the ranchers here in Texas, oh, well, they don't matter. They really don't matter, because the Patriots only care about public land. They don't care about private property. And I would also suggest there might be some opportunities too, at least for some people who would be willing to be very discreet about it, to have a more humanitarian and ethical way of trying to make sure that the people who do come here, at least, don't become welfare leeches. And that's all I'll say publicly. I think if you broach the issue of the border from both sides of it and respecting the rights and liberties of both types of people involved, the private property owners along the border as well as the people trying to flee the narco-trafficking hellhole that Mexico is, I think a real market solution of sorts can be discovered through spontaneous order. But that's not what Trump is doing. What Trump wants to do, at least to what I can pin him down on, is that he wants to centrally plan dealing with the border by throwing up a wall that, of course, will turn into a government boondoggle if it's ever built. So it's a non-solution is what I'm saying. And unfortunately, people are supporting this guy. And they want to vote, and they've already voted in the primaries anyway, and they probably will vote for him in the general election too.
Well, a wall sounds like an amazing way to keep people in.
Yeah.
It sounds like, maybe you can even get some guns and shoot behind it, and, pop your head back up or whatever men and women you draft at that time of World War. I mean, there could be all kinds of things erupted on the border where a wall could be a very strategic thing. So, I mean, yeah, it's even Ron Paul, I think, even warned about the wall being built to keep Americans in. So have others.
Yeah, he did.
With regards to these protests, though, like I'm saying, it's interesting seeing the social engineering aspect of this, because first you saw the people coming and disrupting the Trump events and being thrown out, and now it's like the backlash from the people.
Yes.
And that's where things get a little bit scary. Now this is no longer about, I talked about earlier, certain people might be misconfused or misconstrued to be an immigrant in this country, in a country of immigrants and children of immigrants. The other area of scary is having compassion for those that do have a right to believe as they want to believe and vote as they want to believe, whether I like Donald Trump or not. That's not the case. And even the Young Turks is saying the exact same thing. And, a whole host of other YouTube channels where they're adamantly against Donald Trump. And they're like, what the hell? Not like the people committing the assaults are watching this channel. But no. As Cenk was saying, don't do that. Well, I don't think they really get this whole aspect of people being turned against people by the establishment, whether they understand it, whether they can identify it, or it sounds too conspiratorial or not. I mean, I feel like that's what I'm seeing. So you have people that don't really want to come to terms with the inflammatory statements that Trump has made. There's a lot of denial in this mode of psychology operating right now. They're going to deny the obvious, that this guy is saying things that's going to piss people off. Make references. Let's go after terrorist families. The way that I've been reporting stuff for the last couple of years from my kind of perspective is that we're heading towards some form of occupation. If that ever happens, they're really going to be cruel to Americans. So I'm already on record, going over those scenarios years ago. And so now we have the emergence of Trump, who's going to talk more shit than ever before. It seems in line with the worst case scenario, that this guy, Trump, could actually be used for a specific reason, more than Bush and Obama, for burning Americans at the stake if he ends up being selected, and if the guy starts ending up moving some really bad shit into motion. I would even say there's some pretty strong signs that these are the signs and times to head to the hills, so to speak, depending on what he does when he's in office. It shouldn't take very long, to see where he's going to go.
Well, to kind of expand upon something that was mentioned earlier, I think the Patriots are being very foolish when they talk to me privately and say that they support Trump because they're going to assume he's going to be in a roundabout way being anti-war because he's a businessman. He's going to negotiate with whomever and keep us out of war. With these kind of, I guess you could say maybe borderline incendiary things he's saying, to be polite about it. But agitating, let's put it that way. These agitating statements he's making, like about Megyn Kelly bleeding or whatever, as one example. how is that diplomatic? I mean, if you see Donald Trump, do you really think diplomat? I don't. And so when it comes to, I guess, the action portion of what we've been describing here, Derek Bros, who's a guy I really admire for a lot of reasons, he's actually up in Houston. And, he's starting to kind of get his feet wet in terms of going off grid, because he's actually trying to buy land right now. And what I find rather good, Alex, is that for people who need to have a place to start, he does suggest if you are going to vote, stick only to like state, county, and municipal elections. Don't deal with the federal government. But of course, I think a little bit of a better approach is really, I think there is something to be said for abstaining from all of this. I mean, and like I mentioned earlier, I canceled my voter registration. It's a real legal remedy, and I proved it worked. That's not some sovereign citizen claim. I actually proved it. It's up on my blog, the paperwork and all that. So there are options if people want to, shall I say, revoke their consent to be governed to the extent that the government will allow them to. And that, I think, at least for me, is what the litmus test is. At bare minimum, not voting, I think, is the right thing to do. But if they want to go one more step and get off the voter rolls, I think that's even better. Hell, there's also a possibility that they might not even be called up for jury duty, at least for the federal government anyway. Unfortunately, if you have a Texas driver's license, you can still be called up for jury duty, but that's more of a technical point. Yeah, man, this system is not worth supporting at all. And I think the very least that can be done is to not give... Ayn Rand had a term, which was the sanction of the victim. And when you vote, you are giving sanction to all of it. You are agreeing to the results of the election as it is. And that it's somehow legitimate even when it's not. So that's at least what I suggest. And I practice what I preach. I've done it myself. And I would hope that a lot of anyone who comes across this will at least, take it seriously to heart and, look at your choices. Do you want the cranky fascist or the creepy hands in your pocket socialist? And really look in your own heart, look at your own conscience, and ask yourself, do you support all of this? Do you support the Donald Trumps and Hillary Clintons and Bernie Sanders of the world? Or would you rather actually become a good role model yourself and become a example of actual practical liberty and freedom in your own life? And that, I think, is at least for me, what the takeaway is.
Yeah, I agree. And, part of me thinks, well, if people want to get involved in something, do something local. Yet, the reality is, it is difficult in today's day and age. The group dynamic can be very complicated, but they are at the very least responsible for doing something right themselves, not expecting someone else. That's what enables a conspiracy, looking for politicians and other people to fix things. That's what continues to maintain this type of structure and system of enslavement. And, people want to live in a world without the state. They have to work for that kind of a world.
Yes,
that's a larger conversation. But, yeah, it's definitely not going to happen through any politician. And, even Costilla County, I think that was a situation where people could have got involved on the local level. And, again, you have people that are consuming their time and mind with sovereign citizen stuff and national politics and internet websites and not developing their own websites regarding their own local problem. So, I think people just need to really determine what's right for them, where they want to get involved, because there is still power in numbers in doing something, groups, political parties, as well as the independent path, people that work on their own. It's all valuable. It all has its merit. And both of those things require and involve responsibility. The political process on a national level, some of our closing statements here, I see people giving their power away. They're becoming powerless. They're becoming hopeful and optimistic in the wrong things. So, it's good to be optimistic and positive, and we're going to move forward. How can we make America great? Great again? Oh, definitely a disputed statement. How can we work to make our neighborhoods and society better? How can we have a conversation about the real things that we're going through, the real issues, without things getting diverted back at default, like defaulting back to Sanders and defaulting back to Trump? I don't really meet people in this day and age, Kyle, despite their political obsessions. I'm glad I remember to say this, that are driving around with their bumper stickers. This is a fairly bumper sticker free reality. They can talk all the shit they want on the internet, but they're not necessarily proud of their decisions.
Yeah, and it's interesting, something you said just sparked something I want to mention briefly. There is a mentality, unfortunately, of kind of a lot of this type of sphere of human action being influenced by a Dungeons and Dragons mentality, of kind of it being like a live action role-playing game, unfortunately. And for those of us who do understand how serious this is, for those of us who have lost or sacrificed something, for those of us who have had to get away from certain people that were causing even my own life, which I won't get into here, this is all very real. I mean, police brutality is real. The fractional reserve lending is real with the debasement of the dollar, and so many other things. So when it comes down to how to deal with a lot of this, some of it's going to involve some degree of experimentation. Not all things are going to work equally well. Even the question of whether something like Bitcoin works or not is very much up for debate. And I think there needs to be a lot more experimentation and a lot more honesty regarding what methods and techniques work or don't work. And, that's why, Shane and I put that list together called the Freedom Umbrella of Direct Action, just so that people kind of have an idea of what are the options available to us to increase our own personal liberty. And then people can use that as a kind of directory to then, pick and choose what interests them. There are things like off-grid homesteading and survivalism, but there's also other things like crypto-anarchism in terms of like digital encryption and things more along those lines. There's a lot of options. There are actually over 90 different things we've discovered that at least have some potential for working, but they're not going to all work equally well. And also, they're not going to work equally well for all people, because remember, we're all individuals. What worked for you may not work for the man standing next to you, and so forth. So there needs to really be an appreciation of individuation. And Alex, in closing here, what I've had issue with for years are these reformists, these folks who basically say that our only recourse to redress our grievances is that we must go before the state and beg and plead and prostrate ourselves before those who falsely imagine themselves to be our rulers. And that, I think, is a very defeatist attitude, to be perfectly frank. What is not defeatist is recognizing the system for what it is, at least on its face, and then, taking responsibility, as you said, and exploring and experimenting and even having fun, as much as you can, doing certain things. You've got you're traveling around in your RV. I'm doing some other things. I mean, we're all trying different things to see what works and whatever. Hell, some people have even expatriated, and they're doing the whole perpetual traveler routine where they set up their lives in such a way where they're practicing the maximum amount of tax resistance, while not falling into the civil disobedience version of it. So there are lots of different things. I personally am very optimistic. I agree with Ken O'Keefe that there is a lot to be optimistic about. At the same time, though, I think there also needs to be a serious, I guess you could say grounding, in terms of being really, really honest about what the nature is of the situation we are all suffering from, which I believe is statism. And what I like about what you do is that you do talk about family issues. You do talk about interpersonal relationships, romantic, platonic, or whatever. And I've noticed that whatever content producer in the alternative media even broaches stuff like that, they get a lot of crap. I mean, even old Stefan Molyneux, he got a lot of crap for that. And he was trailblazing. At least I thought so. But yeah, man. I mean, look, it's going to take a lot of experimentation to see what's it going to take to secure our liberty for ourselves and our posterity. And, having said that, I really appreciate talking to you, man. I really do.
Glad we were able to do it. There's some other things that we're going to touch upon, regarding some of the topics that you just threw out there and some other topics. And I think we should do that. We'll do that in the next few days to the next week or so. And it definitely is established them to be staying in the same area. So my long-term travels have now come to an end. And I'm going to experience more of a, enjoying the finer things in life, I guess. Thinking more about things. Alternative media is something that I'm always able to do wherever I go. And reminding other people with regards to solutions, getting involved in this is not for everybody. But this is definitely something that is revolutionizing communications, how we share information. It's still growing. It's still fairly new. So even though I'm doing the off-the-grid thing, there's plenty of ways people in the grid can work with other people if they can find other people of like minds on a level where they can work together and not be in conflict. If you can even imagine, although it is difficult at times, people from the left and right working together in a television studio or in a place to where they recognize they're in the same boat. I know this is difficult, but there's plenty of people that don't believe in the off-grid way. They truly believe in changing things within the system. Okay, but is voting truly the most mindful way to change things within the system? As David Icke would say, take a deep breath, take a step back, and take a look again. It's a piece of shit. Yeah, it's a piece of shit.
Agreed.
And there's other ways of working within the system, and so the system, the grid, communications, marketing, websites, this is the system. The internet is a part of the system. We are working within the system by making use of these technologies in a mindful way. And I think that's definitely what we're doing here, but this is not where it started. We definitely have potentially more years left of internet usage, despite all of our net neutrality doomsday articles that we may come across that may leave us shaking in our boots and making predictions about the death of YouTube. I've been there, I've done it. Google it. What do we do when the YouTube doomsday comes? And I'm just basically telling people, back up your channel.
Yeah.
Don't get too comfortable with this, because even with regards to alternative media, you have your own website, I have mine, and in developing others, it's about creating our content and keeping it on our own websites, on our own property line, and not developing this social media welfare, I guess you can call it, mentality that everything's done through Skype and YouTube, and we just depend on these systems. And I'm sure you've been realizing that as well, Kyle, because you're documenting stuff on both audio and written form,
yeah.
Or you're sharing it in both those forms, not just a McDonald's fast food double YouTube burger with fries, but giving people an intellectual option of how they want to receive the information.
Sure, and just very briefly about that, because this is more of a technical point, but I think a option for some more things that people want to pursue this. A lot of people spend time commuting to and from work for their 9 to 5. And a portion of those people who would be willing to read my material or someone else's material doesn't really have the time or energy left because they lost a lot of that while commuting. So a market solution, dare shall I say, was basically, well, why not just read your own stuff, put it in podcast form, make sure the MP3 is downloadable, and then people can play it while they're weaving in and out of traffic. And it's like, yeah, and then if they want to follow up with, and if they're concerned about some things that I'm saying or someone else is saying, they can then go to the article and use that more as a bibliography to then go click, 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 and say like, oh, I really did quote the blah, blah, blah correctly. And so there's kind of an interoperability between the audio and the written, and even if the written just serves only as a bibliography of sorts. So there's more than one way to skin a cat here, is kind of what I'm getting at. And so far, it seems to be working quite well. And actually, there's also some other content producers, which unfortunately, as of today, Alex, I can only count on one hand, who are basically following that kind of, or at least emulating that type of model, where they write something after it's written, or right around the time it gets published, they record an audio version and they make both available for free download, PDF for the written, MP3 for the audio, so that, yes, in case there is a kill switch or insert, disaster scenario here, people can get the information archived, and even without the internet, if it gets really bad, you can burn stuff to CDs, you can burn things to DVDs, burn entire archives worth of material, especially videos, which tend to be really space heavy on the hard drive, and still get the information out, even if we're living in a Red Dawn scenario with whatever communist troops happen to be on the street. So if it comes down to Samizdat literature, I think we're more than equipped, at least technologically, to really kind of up the game. The question is not so much a question of technology or even know-how. I think it's really going to be a question more of courage and of commitment and intent and brains and things more along those lines.
Definitely, along with having our own drone army to automatically fly the flash drives to whatever remaining television stations are left that can get the message out to the resistance.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say that metaphorically. Well, we covered a lot, Kyle. Glad we can do this. Let's do it again soon.
Okay.
Definitely.
All right, looking forward to it, Alex.
All right.